I'm a 911 dispatcher. I know how liars sound. When my wife came home at 3 a.m. claiming an office emergency, I didn't yell. I just played the voicemail her guilt-ridden best friend left me 2 hours earlier. She collapsed to her knees. That's when I knew the real work was just beginning. My name is Nathan Pierce, and for the past 11 years I have worked as a 911 dispatcher in a mid-sized city where I spend my shifts listening to voices in crisis and learning to distinguish between genuine panic and manufactured drama, between truth spoken under stress and lies constructed in the moment to avoid consequences or redirect blame. The work requires a particular kind of temperament that combines patience with analytical precision, because when someone calls 911, they are often in the worst moment of their life, and they need you to stay calm and methodical while their world is collapsing around them. And over the years, I have developed an instinct for hearing what people are not saying as much as what they are saying, for catching the small inconsistencies in their stories that reveal when someone is holding back information or constructing a narrative that serves their interests rather than reflecting actual events. My wife Lily works as the co-founder of a small environmental nonprofit organization that focuses on urban green space preservation and community education programs, and she launched the organization 4 years ago with a business partner who has since moved to another state, leaving Lily as the primary face of the nonprofit and the person responsible for fundraising and donor relationship management. Lily is passionate about her work in ways that I admire, even when I do not fully understand the social and political dynamics of the nonprofit world. And she has always been someone who thrives on connection and recognition and the feeling that she is making a meaningful contribution to causes larger than herself. While I am more comfortable in the background working systematically through problems that have clear protocols and measurable outcomes. We have been married for 8 years, and for most of that time I believed we had built a stable partnership based on complementary strengths and mutual respect for each other's work and commitments, with me providing steady income and practical problem solving while she brought energy and idealism and a network of social connections that opened doors I would never have thought to knock on. About 6 months ago, I started noticing small changes in Lily's schedule and behavior that individually seemed unremarkable, but collectively created a pattern that triggered the same instinct I use at work. When a caller's story does not quite align with the background sounds I can hear, or the timeline they are describing does not match the urgency in their voice, Lily started having more late-night obligations related to her nonprofit work, board meetings and donor dinners and strategy sessions that seemed to occur with increasing frequency and that always seemed to run later than originally planned, and she developed a habit of stepping into another room to take phone calls and of being less specific about who she was meeting with or what exactly was being discussed when I asked casual questions about how her day had gone. I did not immediately jump to suspicions of infidelity because I have learned both through my work and through life that assuming the worst explanation without evidence is a good way to create problems that do not actually exist, but I did start paying more attention to the details of what Lily was telling me and comparing those details against what I could observe through shared calendars and financial accounts and the general rhythm of her comings and goings. One of the habits Lily and I had maintained since early in our marriage was keeping a shared digital calendar where we both entered our work schedules and personal commitments so that we could coordinate our limited time together and avoid conflicts or misunderstandings about who would be where and when. About 3 months ago, I noticed that Lily had started entering recurring appointments on the calendar labeled simply as Project Deadline every other Thursday evening with no location information and no details about what project was being worked on or who else was involved. And when I asked her casually what these Project Deadline sessions were about, she said they were working meetings with potential donors who preferred evening hours because of their own professional schedules. I accepted this explanation at the time because it seemed plausible enough, but I made a mental note of the pattern because the lack of specificity was unusual compared to how Lily normally documented her work commitments. And over the next several weeks, I began cross-referencing the Project Deadline calendar entries with our joint credit card and bank statements to see if there were charges that corresponded to donor dinners or meeting-related expenses. What I found was that on most of the Thursday evenings marked as Project Deadline nights, there were charges to our joint rideshare account for trips to the hotel district downtown, which seemed odd because Lily had never mentioned meeting donors at hotels, and because hotel meeting spaces are typically expensive enough that a small nonprofit would avoid using them unless there was a specific reason related to donor convenience or event logistics. I did not confront Lily about these observations because I was not yet certain what they meant, and because I knew that bringing up suspicions without solid evidence would likely result in explanations that I would have no way to verify or disprove, and so instead I continued to document what I was seeing and to wait for either an innocent explanation to emerge naturally or for additional evidence to accumulate that would clarify whether my instincts were correct. About 2 months ago, Lily told me that she had started seeing a therapist to help her manage stress related to the nonprofit's funding challenges, and her own feelings of being overwhelmed by the competing demands of work and marriage and personal fulfillment, and she said that she would be attending weekly therapy sessions every Wednesday evening for the foreseeable future. I told Lily that I thought therapy was a good idea and that I supported her taking care of her mental health, and I asked if there was anything I could do to reduce her stress or to be more helpful in managing household responsibilities so that she would have more time and energy for her work. Lily said that the best thing I could do was give her space to work through her feelings with the therapist and not pressure her to explain every emotional struggle or question every late night she needed to spend catching up on work, and I agreed to this request because it seemed reasonable and because I did not want to be the kind of partner who demanded constant access to every aspect of my spouse's inner life or who treated normal privacy boundaries as evidence of wrongdoing. Over the next 2 months, Lily's weekly therapy appointments became part of our routine, and I noticed that she seemed to come home from these Wednesday evening sessions in a better mood than she left in, more relaxed and energized and affectionate in ways that made me think perhaps the therapy was genuinely helping her work through whatever stress or dissatisfaction she had been experiencing. At the same time, I noticed that the pattern of late Thursday night project deadline sessions continued, and that there were now occasional Friday evening entries on the calendar marked as donor cultivation, with similarly vague location information, and the rideshare charges to the hotel district continued to appear on our joint account on many of these evenings. 3 weeks ago, Lily's best friend Rachel called me during my shift at work, which was unusual because Rachel normally communicated with me only through Lily or through group social events where we all happened to be present. And when I answered the call, Rachel's voice sounded strained and uncertain in the way that people sound when they are about to deliver information they know will be unwelcome or painful. Rachel said that she needed to talk to me about something important and that she had been debating for weeks whether to call me or to mind her own business and stay out of a situation that was not really her problem, but that she had finally decided that not saying anything would be a form of complicity, and that she could not continue to carry the knowledge of what she had seen without at least giving me the opportunity to know the truth. I asked Rachel to tell me what she was talking about, and she said that 2 nights earlier she had been at a hotel bar downtown meeting a client for drinks, and while she was waiting for her client to arrive, she had seen Lily sitting in a corner booth with a man who Rachel did not recognize, and that Lily and this man had been sitting very close together in a way that did not look like a professional meeting or a casual friendship, but rather looked like 2 people who were romantically involved. Rachel said that she had debated whether to approach Lily and say hello or whether to pretend she had not seen her, and she had ultimately decided to leave the bar without making contact because she did not want to interrupt what was clearly meant to be a private meeting, but that as she was leaving she had looked back and had seen the man lean in and kiss Lily in a way that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. I thanked Rachel for calling me and asked her if she was absolutely certain about what she had seen, and she said that she had thought about little else for the past 2 days and that she was completely certain that it was Lily and that the interaction she had witnessed was unambiguously romantic rather than professional or platonic. Rachel said that she had decided to call me rather than confronting Lily directly because she felt that I deserved to hear about the situation from someone who cared about both of us and who was not trying to cause drama but simply could not live with staying silent about such a significant betrayal. And she apologized repeatedly for being the bearer of such painful news and asked if there was anything she could do to support me or to help me figure out what to do next. I told Rachel that I appreciated her honesty and her willingness to come forward, despite knowing how difficult the conversation would be, and I asked her if she would be willing to provide a written statement about what she had seen and when and where she had seen it, because I knew that if I was going to confront Lily about the affair, I would need documentation and corroboration rather than just accusations based on a single person's account. Rachel agreed immediately and said that she would write down everything she remembered and would send it to me by the end of the day, and before we ended the call she said that she wanted me to know that she had always liked and respected me and that she thought Lily was making a terrible mistake and throwing away a good marriage for reasons that Rachel could not understand. After the call with Rachel ended, I sat at my dispatch station for several minutes processing what I had just learned and deciding how to respond, and I realized that the information Rachel had provided was the missing piece that made sense of all the small observations and inconsistencies I had been tracking for months, the vague calendar entries and the hotel district rideshare charges and the increased need for privacy, and the claims about therapy sessions that now seemed likely to be covers for meetings with this man Rachel had seen her with at the hotel bar. I decided that before confronting Lily, I would gather additional evidence and would verify as much of her story as possible so that when the confrontation happened, I would have facts and documentation rather than just suspicions and second-hand accounts that she could potentially explain away or minimize. That night, when I came home from my shift, Lily was already asleep, and the next morning she left for work before I woke up, and we had no significant interaction for the next several days because our schedules were misaligned and because I was deliberately avoiding extended conversations while I worked on gathering evidence and planning my approach. 2 nights ago was one of Lily's scheduled Wednesday therapy appointments, and she left the house at 6:30 in the evening, saying that she would be home by 9:30 or 10 at the latest, and I told her that I would probably be asleep when she got home because I had an early shift the next morning. After Lily left for her supposed therapy appointment, I sat in the living room thinking about how I wanted to handle the situation when she returned, and I decided that rather than going to bed as I had told her I would wait up and create an environment where the truth could no longer be avoided or deferred with vague explanations and requests for privacy. I turned off all the lights in the house except for a small lamp in the hallway that provided just enough illumination to see shapes and movement, but not enough to create a sense of normal domestic comfort, and I positioned myself in the kitchen chair that faced the front door so that I would be the first thing Lily saw when she entered the house, but so that she would not be able to see my face clearly until she turned on additional lights or moved closer. At 9:45 in the evening, which was within the time frame Lily had predicted for her return, my phone vibrated with an incoming voicemail notification, and when I checked the caller identification, I saw that it was from Rachel and that she had left a message rather than calling during a time when she knew I might be working. I played the voicemail and heard Rachel's voice speaking quickly and with obvious distress, saying that she was calling because she had just seen Lily at the Regency Hotel bar again tonight, and that Lily was with the same man she had been with 2 nights earlier, and that Rachel felt sick about seeing them together again and knowing that Lily was continuing the affair while apparently lying to me about attending therapy appointments. Rachel's voicemail continued with her saying that she had tried to convince herself that maybe the first sighting had been an isolated incident, or that maybe there was some explanation she was not aware of, but that seeing them together a second time made it clear this was an ongoing relationship and not a one-time mistake or a misunderstanding, and she said that she could not keep covering for Lily or pretending she did not know what was happening when I deserved to know the truth about what my wife was actually doing. During all these evenings, she claimed to be at work meetings or therapy sessions. Rachel ended the voicemail by saying that she hoped I would forgive her for getting involved in my marriage, but that she valued honesty and loyalty and could not watch her friend destroy her marriage through systematic deception without at least trying to give me the information I needed to make informed decisions about my own life. I saved the voicemail to my phone and made a backup recording of it using a separate device, and then I returned to my position in the kitchen chair facing the front door and waited for Lily to come home. The timestamp on Rachel's voicemail was 10:14 in the evening, which meant that at the time Rachel had seen Lily at the hotel bar, Lily's therapy session would theoretically have ended only 45 minutes earlier if her story about therapy had been true, and the fact that she was at a hotel bar rather than driving home from a therapist's office was additional confirmation that the therapy story was a fabrication designed to create cover for whatever relationship she was conducting with this man. At 11:30, I heard a car pull up outside the house, and a few minutes later, I heard Lily's key sliding into the front door lock, and the door opened slowly as though she was trying to enter quietly without waking me up if I was already asleep as I had said I would be. Lily stepped into the darkened entryway and closed the door behind her with a soft click, and she set her bag down on the floor and began to remove her jacket before she noticed that I was sitting in the kitchen chair watching her from the shadows. Lily startled visibly when she saw my silhouette in the dim light, and she put her hand on her chest and let out a small sound of surprise, and then she said my name in a questioning tone and asked why I was sitting in the dark instead of sleeping as I had told her I would be. I did not immediately answer her question, but instead asked her in a calm and level voice where she had been tonight, and there was a pause during which I could see her face processing the question and calculating what answer would be safest or most convincing. Lily said that she had been at her therapy appointment as scheduled and that afterward she had stopped at the office to pick up some files she needed for a grant application deadline that was coming up in the next few days, and she said that the office work had taken longer than she expected, which was why she was getting home later than she had originally predicted. I asked her which therapist she was seeing and what the address of the therapy office was, and Lily gave me a name that I had heard her mention before and an address in a professional building about 20 minutes from our house. I asked Lily if her therapy session tonight had been productive, and if she felt like the work she was doing with the therapist was helping her manage the stress she had been experiencing, and she said that yes, she thought the therapy was helping and that she was learning better coping strategies for dealing with the pressures of running a nonprofit and maintaining work-life balance. I nodded as though I was satisfied with this answer, and then I asked Lily to please come sit down at the kitchen table with me because I wanted to talk to her about something important. Lily said that she was exhausted and that she really needed to get some sleep because she had an early meeting the next morning, and she asked if whatever I wanted to talk about could wait until tomorrow when we were both more rested and alert. I told Lily that no, it could not wait until tomorrow, and that she needed to sit down right now because we were going to have a conversation about where she had actually been tonight and who she had been with and how long this pattern of lying had been going on. Lily's expression changed from tired and slightly annoyed to wary and defensive, and she said that she did not appreciate being interrogated like a suspect when she had just told me exactly where she had been and what she had been doing. I reached for my phone on the table in front of me and said that I had received some information tonight that contradicted her story about attending therapy, and that before we continued this conversation, I wanted her to listen to something that had been sent to me by someone who cared about both of us and who had finally decided that staying silent was not the right choice. Lily asked what I was talking about and who had been sending me information about her, and I did not answer, but instead pressed play on Rachel's voicemail and set the phone on the table between us with the speaker volume turned up so that Rachel's voice filled the quiet kitchen. The voicemail played from the beginning with Rachel's distressed tone explaining that she was calling because she had just seen Lily at the Regency Hotel bar with the same man she had been with 2 nights earlier, and that she could not keep pretending she did not know what was happening when it was clear that Lily was conducting an ongoing affair while lying to me about attending therapy appointments. As the voicemail continued, Lily's face went through a series of changes from confusion to recognition to something that looked like panic mixed with anger, and she reached across the table as though to grab my phone and stop the playback. But I moved the phone out of her reach and let the voicemail continue until Rachel's final statement about valuing honesty and loyalty and hoping that I would use the information to make informed decisions about my life. When the voicemail ended, the kitchen was completely silent except for the sound of Lily's breathing, which had become faster and shallower, and I watched her face as she processed the fact that her cover story had been completely destroyed by a witness who had seen her in a place she was not supposed to be with a person she had never mentioned existed. Lily started to say something and then stopped, and then she started again saying that Rachel had misunderstood what she had seen and that the man Lily had been meeting at the hotel bar was a potential major donor who preferred to conduct preliminary conversations in informal settings rather than in office environments, and that the meetings were completely professional even if they might have appeared otherwise to someone who was observing from a distance without understanding the context. I asked Lily why she had never mentioned these hotel bar meetings with potential major donors to me, and why she had instead told me she was attending therapy sessions during times when she was apparently meeting this donor in settings that looked intimate enough to make her best friend uncomfortable. Lily said that she had not told me about the donor meetings because she knew I would not understand the dynamics of nonprofit fundraising and would probably be uncomfortable with the informal approach this particular donor preferred, and that she had mentioned therapy as a general explanation for her Wednesday evening commitments because it was easier than trying to explain complex donor cultivation strategies to someone who was not involved in that world. I pointed out that this explanation required me to believe that she had lied to me about therapy for 2 months because she thought the truth about meeting donors would be too complicated to explain, and that this made no sense unless there was something about the donor meetings that she knew I would object to if I understood what was actually happening. Lily's face flushed, and she said that I was being paranoid and controlling, and that I was twisting her words to make innocent professional activities seem suspicious, and she asked why I was choosing to believe Rachel's interpretation of what she had seen rather than believing Lily's explanation of her own professional activities. I told Lily that I was choosing to believe Rachel because Rachel had nothing to gain from lying to me and had in fact been deeply reluctant to get involved in our marriage at all, while Lily had a clear motivation to minimize and reframe her activities in whatever way would avoid consequences or difficult conversations about what she had actually been doing for the past several months. I then asked Lily to explain why our joint rideshare account showed multiple charges for trips to the hotel district on Thursday evenings that corresponded to her calendar entries for project deadline meetings, and why she had never mentioned that these project deadline meetings were taking place at hotels, or who exactly she was meeting with during these sessions that apparently required her to be out until midnight or later. Lily looked startled by this question and asked if I had been tracking her movements and going through our financial accounts looking for evidence of wrongdoing, and I said that I had been reviewing our shared calendar and our joint financial accounts, which I had every right to access because they were shared resources that belonged to both of us. I told Lily that I had been noticing inconsistencies in her schedule and her explanations for several months, and that I had been documenting these inconsistencies in the same way I would document any pattern of information that did not align properly, and that Rachel's voicemail had simply confirmed what I had already begun to suspect based on the evidence I had been gathering. Lily stood up from the table and said that she was not going to sit there and be accused of infidelity based on rideshare receipts and one person's misinterpretation of a professional meeting, and that if I did not trust her, then maybe we had bigger problems in our marriage than she had realized. I remained seated and said that I agreed we had bigger problems than I had realized, but that those problems were not about trust or paranoia, but rather about systematic deception and the choice to conduct secret meetings with another man while lying about therapy appointments and work obligations. I asked Lily directly who the man was that she had been meeting at the hotel bar and how long she had known him and what exactly the nature of their relationship was. And Lily said that his name was Victor and that he was a retired real estate developer who served as the chairman of the charity gala board that provided funding recommendations for nonprofit organizations, including hers. Lily continued by saying that Victor had approached her 6 months earlier at an alumni fundraiser event where they had both been guests, and that he had expressed interest in her nonprofit's work and had suggested that she apply for funding consideration through the charity gala board, which he chaired and which had substantial resources available for environmental and community-focused organizations. Lily said that Victor had offered to mentor her through the application process and had been meeting with her regularly to provide guidance on how to position her organization's work in ways that would appeal to the board's funding priorities and donor preferences, and that these mentorship meetings had been completely professional even if they had taken place in informal settings like hotel bars rather than in traditional office environments. I asked Lily why she had never mentioned Victor's name or his role as her mentor to me during the 6 months they had supposedly been meeting regularly, and why none of her calendar entries for project deadline meetings or donor cultivation sessions had included any reference to Victor, or to the charity gala board, or to the funding application she was supposedly working on with his guidance. Lily said that she had not wanted to get my hopes up about a major funding opportunity until she was certain the application would be successful, and that she had kept the details vague because she was superstitious about talking too much about opportunities before they were finalized. I told Lily that this explanation was insulting to my intelligence, and that I was not going to pretend to believe that 6 months of secret meetings with a man who was important enough to her life that she was lying about therapy appointments and rearranging her entire schedule could be explained away as superstition about discussing pending grant applications. I said that Rachel had described seeing them together in a way that looked unambiguously romantic rather than professional, and that Rachel had specifically mentioned seeing Victor lean in and kiss Lily in a manner that left no doubt about the intimate nature of their relationship. Lily's face went pale when I mentioned the kiss that Rachel had witnessed, and for a moment she did not say anything, but simply stared at me as though trying to calculate whether there was any explanation that would undo the damage of the specific detail. Finally, Lily said that yes, Victor had kissed her at the end of one of their meetings, but that it had been a surprise to her and that she had immediately told him it was inappropriate and that their relationship needed to remain professional, and that the kiss had been a one-time boundary violation that she had handled by setting clear expectations about acceptable behavior going forward. I asked Lily when this supposed boundary violation had occurred and whether it had happened 2 nights ago when Rachel first saw them together, or whether it had happened at some earlier point in their 6-month mentorship relationship. And Lily hesitated and then said that she could not remember the exact date, but that it had been several weeks ago, and that since then, she and Victor had maintained appropriate professional distance. I pointed out that Rachel's voicemail had mentioned seeing them together again tonight, which was the same night Lily had told me she was attending her weekly therapy session, and that if Lily had truly set boundaries with Victor several weeks ago, it seemed strange that she would still be meeting him at hotel bars during time she was claiming to spend with a therapist. Lily said that tonight's meeting had been necessary because the funding application deadline was approaching and there were final details that needed to be discussed, and that she had met Victor at the hotel bar rather than at his office because he had a dinner meeting nearby and could only spare 30 minutes between commitments. I asked Lily why she had not simply told me the truth about meeting Victor tonight instead of lying about going to therapy, and she said that she had known I would be uncomfortable with her meeting him, given the previous boundary issue, and that she had made the calculation that a small lie about her location would avoid an unnecessary argument about something that was ultimately just a brief professional meeting. I told Lily that what she was describing was not a small lie, but rather part of a sustained pattern of deception that had been going on for months and that involved fabricating therapy appointments and creating vague calendar entries and carefully managing what information she shared with me so that I would not discover the real nature of her relationship with Victor. I said that people in healthy marriages do not need to construct elaborate systems of lies and misdirection to hide professional mentorship relationships, and that the fact that she had felt the need to be this secretive suggested she knew the relationship was inappropriate regardless of how she was now trying to characterize it. Lily started crying and said that she had not intended for things to become so complicated and that she had originally seen Victor as simply a professional opportunity, but that over time their conversations had become more personal and she had found herself looking forward to their meetings in ways that went beyond just professional networking. She said that she had been feeling disconnected from our marriage for a long time and that I seemed more interested in my work and my routines than in her emotional needs or her dreams for what her life and career could become, and that Victor had made her feel valued and interesting in ways that she had not felt in our relationship for years. I listened to this explanation without interrupting, and when Lily finished speaking, I asked her whether she was saying that she had been having an affair with Victor, or whether she was still claiming that their relationship had remained professional despite developing emotional intimacy and despite the kiss that Rachel had witnessed. Lily said that she and Victor had not had a physical affair in the sense of sleeping together, but that she acknowledged there had been emotional intimacy that had crossed boundaries, and that she should have been more honest with me about what was happening, rather than trying to manage the situation through secrecy. I asked Lily if she expected me to believe that 6 months of regular meetings at hotel bars with a man who had kissed her, and who she admitted feeling emotionally intimate with, had never progressed beyond conversation and one boundary-crossing kiss, and I pointed out that Rachel had seen them together in circumstances that suggested a level of comfort and physical closeness that typically only develops between people who have an established romantic relationship rather than people who are maintaining professional boundaries. Lily said that she understood why I was skeptical, but that she was telling me the truth about the physical limits of her relationship with Victor, and that she hoped we could work through this situation through counseling or structured conversations rather than immediately jumping to divorce or permanent separation. I told Lily that before we discussed anything about working through the situation or pursuing counseling, I needed her to answer some specific questions about her schedule over the past several months so that I could understand the full scope of what had been happening and could make informed decisions about how to proceed. I asked Lily to confirm that the 11 project deadline calendar entries over the past 6 months had all been meetings with Victor, and after a pause, she admitted that yes, most of those evenings had involved meeting Victor, although a few of them had been legitimate work sessions with other colleagues or donors. I asked Lily to confirm that her weekly Wednesday therapy appointments over the past 2 months had not actually been therapy sessions, but had instead been additional meetings with Victor. And Lily looked down at the table and said that some of the Wednesday evenings had been meetings with Victor, but that she had attended a few actual therapy sessions as well, because she had genuinely been struggling with stress and conflicting feelings about our marriage. I told Lily that I would be calling the therapist's office that she had given me as her provider to verify whether she had any patient record there, and how many sessions she had actually attended, and Lily said that I had no right to call her therapist and violate her privacy by discussing her mental health treatment with medical professionals. I responded that if she had actually been attending therapy sessions, then her therapist would be able to confirm that she was a patient without disclosing any details about her treatment, and that if she had not been attending therapy sessions, then there would be no privacy to violate because there would be no treatment record to protect. I said that I would be verifying this information tomorrow, regardless of whether she gave me permission, because at this point I had no reason to trust anything she told me without independent confirmation from sources that had no incentive to protect her or minimize her deception. Lily stood up from the table and said that she could not continue this conversation tonight because she was exhausted and emotionally overwhelmed and needed time to think about how to explain everything in a way that I would understand, and she asked if we could pause the discussion until the next day when we had both had time to process what had been said and could approach the situation with clearer heads. I told Lily that she could go to bed if she wanted to, but that I would not be sleeping in the same room with her until I had a much better understanding of what had actually been happening over the past 6 months, and whether there was any possibility of rebuilding trust between us. Lily asked where I expected her to sleep if I was refusing to share our bedroom, and I said that she could sleep in the guest room or she could go stay with a friend, but that I needed physical and emotional space from her while I processed the information I had learned tonight, and while I gathered additional evidence about her activities and her relationship with Victor. Lily said that I was being cruel and punishing her before I had even heard her full explanation or given her a chance to make things right, and I told her that I had given her multiple chances tonight to tell me the truth, and that each time she had offered only partial admissions mixed with defensive justifications and attempts to minimize the significance of her choices. I said that the pattern of her responses during our conversation had made it clear that she was still more focused on managing my perception of her behavior than on being fully honest about what had happened, and that until she was ready to provide complete transparency about her relationship with Victor and about all the lies she had told to cover up that relationship, there was no foundation for any kind of productive conversation about reconciliation or healing. Lily started crying harder and said that she had made mistakes, but that she still loved me and still wanted our marriage to work, and that she was terrified I was going to throw away 8 years together without giving her any opportunity to prove that she could be honest and recommit to our relationship. I told Lily that I was not the one who had thrown away 8 years of marriage, and that the person who had made that choice was the one who had decided to pursue an intimate relationship with another man, while systematically lying to her husband about where she was going and what she was doing and who she was spending time with during hours that should have been dedicated to therapy or to legitimate work obligations. I said that the consequences she was now facing were the natural result of her own decisions over the past 6 months, and that while I understood she was upset about those consequences, Her distress did not obligate me to immediately forgive her, or to pretend that trust could be rebuilt through a single conversation where she had still not been fully forthcoming about the extent of her betrayal. Lily asked me what I was going to do next, and whether I had already decided to file for divorce, or whether there was any possibility that I would be willing to attend couples counseling or to work with a mediator to try to save our marriage. I told Lily that I had not yet decided what legal steps I would be taking, but that my first priority was to gather complete and accurate information about what had actually been happening rather than relying on her selective disclosures and defensive explanations, and that once I had that information, I would make decisions about how to proceed based on the full scope of her deception and betrayal, rather than on the sanitized version she was currently trying to present. The morning after my confrontation with Lily, I woke up on the couch in the living room where I had spent the night after our kitchen conversation had ended, with her retreating to the guest bedroom and me deciding that I needed to stay in a common area of the house rather than isolating myself in our bedroom where I would spend hours replaying the conversation and analyzing every word she had said for signs of truth or continued deception. I checked my phone and saw that it was 6:30 in the morning and that I had received a text message from Lily that had been sent at 5:45, which meant she had been awake for at least an hour before I stirred from the uncomfortable position I had maintained on the couch throughout the night. The text message from Lily said that she was going to stay with her friend Jennifer for a few days to give both of us space to think about what we wanted and to avoid the tension and awkwardness of living in the same house while we were in such different emotional states, and that she hoped I would use this time to consider whether there was any path forward for our marriage that did not involve immediately pursuing legal separation or divorce. I did not respond to Lily's text message because I felt that any response I sent would either be cold and dismissive or would invite further conversation that I was not ready to have, and so instead I simply noted that she had chosen to leave the house and to frame her departure as being for my benefit, rather than acknowledging that she was avoiding continued accountability and uncomfortable questions about her relationship with Victor. I got up from the couch and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table reviewing the notes I had made on my phone the previous night during and after my conversation with Lily, and I organized these notes into categories that included confirmed lies, partial admissions, defensive justifications, and questions that still needed to be answered through independent verification. The list of confirmed lies included her claims about attending weekly therapy sessions for the past 2 months, her characterization of the project deadline calendar entries as work meetings rather than meetings with Victor, and her initial story about last night being a therapy appointment when she had actually been at a hotel bar with Victor, as documented by Rachel's voicemail. The partial admissions category included Lily's acknowledgement that she had developed emotional intimacy with Victor that crossed appropriate boundaries, her admission that Victor had kissed her at some point during their 6-month relationship, and her concession that many of the Thursday evening project deadline meetings had involved Victor rather than the legitimate donor work or grant deadlines she had originally implied. The defensive justifications included her claims that she had not told me about Victor because she did not want to get my hopes up about funding opportunities, her assertion that the hotel bar meetings were Victor's preference rather than her choice, and her suggestion that her deception had been necessary to avoid arguments about professional relationships that I supposedly would not understand. The questions that still needed independent verification included whether Lily had ever actually attended any therapy sessions at all, or whether the entire therapy story had been fabricated from the beginning, how many of the 11 project deadline calendar entries had actually been meetings with Victor versus legitimate work obligations, whether there were additional meetings or interactions with Victor beyond what appeared in our shared calendar, and most importantly, whether Lily's claim that the relationship had remained emotionally intimate but not physically consummated was accurate, or whether this was another form of damage control designed to minimize the severity of her betrayal. I decided that my first priority for the day would be to call the therapy clinic that Lily had named as her provider and to verify whether she had any patient record there and whether she had attended sessions during the time period she had claimed to be in weekly therapy, because this piece of information would help me understand whether any part of her story about managing stress and working on personal growth had been true or whether the entire therapy narrative had been constructed solely as cover for meeting Victor. I waited until 9 in the morning, when I assumed the clinic would be open for business, and then I called the main number and asked to speak with someone who could confirm whether a patient record existed for my wife. The receptionist who answered the phone said that she could not provide any information about patient records or treatment history due to privacy regulations, but that if I gave her my wife's name and date of birth, she could check whether there was an active patient file and could confirm whether or not the person in question had ever been seen at the clinic. I provided Lily's full name and her date of birth, and I heard the receptionist typing on a keyboard and then pausing for what seemed like a longer time than would be necessary to simply look up a patient record in a database. Finally, the receptionist came back on the line and said that she was not finding any patient record under that name and date of birth combination, and she asked if it was possible that my wife had been seen at a different location within their clinic network, or whether she might have used a different name or an alternate spelling when registering for services. I told the receptionist that my wife had specifically named this clinic location and had been claiming to attend weekly appointments here every Wednesday evening for approximately the past 2 months, and I asked if there was any possibility that her records had been misfiled or entered under incorrect information. The receptionist said that their patient database was quite reliable, and that if someone had been attending weekly sessions for 2 months, there would definitely be a record in the system, and she suggested that perhaps my wife had been seeing a different therapist at a different practice, and I had misunderstood which clinic she was attending. I thanked the receptionist for checking and ended the call, and I immediately made a note in my phone documenting the date and time of the call and the fact that the clinic had confirmed there was no patient record for Lily, which meant that her claims about attending therapy sessions had been completely fabricated, and that every Wednesday evening for the past 2 months, when she had told me she was working on her mental health, she had actually been meeting Victor. This confirmation that Lily had been lying about therapy felt like a significant turning point in my understanding of the situation, because therapy had been the one part of her story that had seemed potentially legitimate and that had made me feel some sympathy for her claims about being stressed and overwhelmed by competing demands. The fact that she had invented an entire therapeutic relationship and had maintained the fiction for 2 months with enough detail and consistency to be convincing suggested a level of deliberate deception that went beyond simply hiding an inappropriate friendship or minimizing the emotional intimacy of a professional mentoring relationship. After confirming that the therapy story was false, I turned my attention to documenting the pattern of Thursday evening project deadline meetings and the rideshare charges to the hotel district that corresponded to these calendar entries, and I logged into our joint rideshare account and filtered the trip history to show only Thursday evening rides over the past 6 months. The results showed 9 separate trips that had been charged to our joint account where the destination was listed as an address in the hotel district. And when I cross-referenced these dates with Lily's calendar entries, I found that 7 of the 9 rideshare trips corresponded exactly to evenings when she had marked project deadline meetings on our shared calendar. I took screenshots of each rideshare receipt showing the date, time, pickup location, destination address, and cost of the trip, and I saved these screenshots in a folder on my phone that I had created specifically for documenting evidence related to Lily's affair. I then expanded my search to include Friday evenings and weekends to see if there were additional hotel district trips that had not been specifically marked on the calendar as project deadline meetings, and I found 2 additional trips on Friday evenings that fell during time periods when Lily had told me she was working late at the office or attending networking events. As I was reviewing the rideshare history, I noticed something else that seemed significant, which was that several of the trips showed a pickup location at our house and a destination in the hotel district, but the return trips were not charged to our joint account, which suggested that either Lily had paid for her return trips using a different payment method, or someone else had provided transportation for her to get home after these hotel meetings. This detail seemed to support the possibility that Victor had been involved in arranging at least some aspects of these encounters, and it raised questions about what other expenses or logistics related to the affair might have been kept off our joint accounts to avoid creating an obvious paper trail. I decided that in addition to the rideshare documentation, I should also review our joint credit card and bank account statements more carefully to look for any hotel charges, restaurant expenses, or other spending that might correspond to the dates and times when Lily had been meeting Victor, and I spent the next hour going through 3 months of financial records looking for patterns or anomalies that seemed worth investigating further. What I found was that while there were no direct hotel room charges on our joint accounts, there were several charges at upscale hotel restaurants and hotel bar locations on dates that matched the project deadline calendar entries, and these charges were consistent with the kind of intimate dinner or drinks meetings that Lily and Victor had apparently been conducting. I took screenshots of each of these charges and added them to my evidence folder, and I created a simple spreadsheet that listed each suspected meeting date along with the corresponding calendar entry, rideshare receipt, and any restaurant or bar charges that appeared on our financial statements. As I worked on this documentation, I felt the same kind of methodical focus that I experienced during complex emergency calls at work, where the key to managing a crisis situation was to gather information systematically and to avoid making assumptions or jumping to conclusions before you had verified the facts. While I was working on the financial documentation, I received a phone call from an unknown number with a local area code, and when I answered, a woman's voice asked if I was Nathan Pierce and if I was married to Lily Pierce. And when I confirmed that I was, she introduced herself as Claire Morrison and said that she needed to speak with me about something that was difficult and uncomfortable, but that she believed I had a right to know. I asked Claire how she had gotten my phone number and what this was about, and she said that she had obtained my contact information through a mutual acquaintance who had told her about the situation with Lily and Victor, and that she was calling because she had information that would be relevant to my understanding of Victor's character and his pattern of behavior in relationships. Claire explained that she was Victor's wife and that they had been married for 22 years, and that she had recently discovered evidence that Victor had been having an affair and had been lying to her about his schedule and his activities in ways that sounded very similar to what she understood had been happening in my marriage. Claire said that she had confronted Victor about hotel charges and unexplained late nights, and he had initially denied everything, but that when she had pressed him for details, he had eventually admitted that he had been meeting regularly with someone he described as a young professional he was mentoring, and that their relationship had developed emotional intimacy that he acknowledged was inappropriate, but that he claimed had not become physical. I felt a wave of shock and anger as I processed what Claire was telling me, because Lily had never mentioned that Victor was married, and had in fact implied, through some of her comments during our kitchen confrontation, that Victor was available and unattached in ways that made their relationship less clearly wrong than it would have been if he had been betraying his own spouse in addition to facilitating Lily's betrayal of me. I asked Claire if she was certain that Victor had been referring to Lily when he mentioned the young professional he was mentoring, and Claire said that she had found text messages on Victor's phone where Lily's name appeared, along with references to meeting times and locations that matched the hotel bar and restaurant charges she had discovered on their credit card statements. Claire said that when she had confronted Victor with these text messages and asked him directly if he was having an affair with Lily, he had become defensive and had accused her of being paranoid and controlling, but that he had not actually denied that Lily was the person he had been meeting or that their relationship had crossed appropriate boundaries. Claire told me that she had spent the past week feeling isolated and humiliated and unsure of who to talk to about the situation, and that when she had mentioned Victor's affair to a friend who knew some of the nonprofit community people in the city, the friend had told her that she had heard rumors about problems in my marriage, and had suggested that Claire and I might benefit from comparing notes about what we had each discovered. I asked Claire if she would be willing to meet in person so that we could share the evidence we had each gathered and could discuss how we wanted to handle the situation going forward, because it seemed clear that both Victor and Lily had been lying not only to their respective spouses, but also to each other in ways that created layers of deception that needed to be untangled before either of us could fully understand what had actually been happening. Claire agreed immediately and said that she had been hoping I would be open to meeting because she felt that coordinating our responses would be more effective than each of us trying to hold our respective spouses accountable in isolation, and we arranged to meet at a coffee shop across town later that afternoon at 3 o'clock. I spent the hours before the meeting with Claire continuing to document the evidence I had gathered about Lily's schedule and activities, and I also used that time to think carefully about what I wanted to achieve through any coordination with Victor's wife and what risks might be involved in sharing information with someone I did not know and whose motivations I could not fully assess. I recognized that Claire might have her own agenda that did not align with my interests, or that she might be gathering information to use in her own confrontations with Victor in ways that could complicate my ability to manage my situation with Lily, but I also felt that the potential benefits of understanding Victor's perspective and his version of events outweighed these risks. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Claire was already seated at a corner table with a folder in front of her and a cup of tea that looked like it had been sitting untouched for some time, and when she saw me enter, she stood up and introduced herself with a handshake that was formal and composed, despite the obvious emotional strain visible in her face. Claire was a woman who appeared to be in her late 40s with professional attire and a manner that suggested she was accustomed to managing difficult situations with a degree of control and precision, and as we sat down, she told me that she worked as an administrator at a large hospital in the region, and that her job had taught her to compartmentalize emotional reactions and focus on gathering facts before making decisions about how to respond to crisis situations. I told Claire that I worked as a 911 dispatcher and that I had developed similar habits of staying calm and systematic when dealing with information that was emotionally difficult or that revealed patterns of behavior that challenged my assumptions about people I thought I knew well. Claire nodded and said that she was relieved to be talking with someone who understood the value of documentation and verification rather than someone who would approach the situation purely from an emotional perspective, and she opened the folder in front of her and showed me printed copies of credit card statements with highlighted charges at hotels and restaurants that she said corresponded to times when Victor had claimed to be at board meetings or attending business dinners. I pulled out my phone and showed Claire the screenshots I had taken of our rideshare receipts and the spreadsheet I had created listing Lily's calendar entries alongside the financial evidence that contradicted her stated alibis, and Claire studied these documents carefully and then pointed out that several of the dates on my timeline matched exactly with dates on her credit card statements where Victor had charged expensive dinners or bar tabs at hotel locations. This correlation between our independent documentation seemed to confirm that Lily and Victor had been meeting regularly over a period of at least 6 months, and that both of them had been constructing elaborate cover stories to hide these meetings from their respective spouses. Claire said that the most disturbing thing she had discovered during her investigation of Victor's activities was not just the affair itself, but the realization that he had been deliberately misleading Lily about his marital status in ways that suggested he was manipulating both of us to serve his own interests and desires. I asked Claire what she meant by this, and she pulled out several printed text message exchanges between Victor and Lily that she said she had photographed from Victor's phone before he had realized she was gathering evidence. And these messages included conversations where Lily had expressed sympathy for Victor's difficult marriage and his plans to pursue a divorce once certain financial arrangements had been finalized. I read through these text messages with growing anger as I realized that Lily had apparently believed that Victor was in the process of ending his marriage and would eventually be free to pursue a relationship with her openly, and that this belief had likely been part of what had motivated her to continue the affair despite whatever guilt or conflict she might have felt about betraying our marriage. Claire said that Victor had never mentioned plans to divorce her and had in fact been making long-term financial plans with her that assumed they would remain married indefinitely, and that the divorce story he had told Lily was completely fabricated and designed to make Lily feel less guilty about participating in an affair with a married man. I asked Claire if she had confronted Victor about these text messages and about his lies to Lily regarding his marital status, and Claire said that she had shown him the messages and had demanded an explanation, and that Victor had initially tried to claim that he had told Lily he was planning to divorce simply to avoid uncomfortable conversations about his marriage rather than because he actually intended to follow through on such plans. Claire said that Victor's willingness to lie so casually to both his wife and his affair partner suggested a level of manipulation and deceit that went beyond the normal rationalization and boundary crossing that might occur in a situation where someone was genuinely confused or conflicted about their feelings and commitments. I showed Claire the marriage certificate that I had obtained from public records showing that she and Victor were legally married and that there had been no divorce filing in the county records system, and I suggested that this document would be valuable evidence if we decided to present our findings to any of the professional or social contexts where Victor and Lily operated, because it would make it impossible for Victor to continue claiming that his marriage was ending or that his relationship with Lily existed in some kind of ambiguous space between committed relationships. Claire took a photo of the marriage certificate with her phone and said that she thought having this documentation would be important if we decided to make the affair public in any way, because it would prevent Victor from rewriting the narrative to make himself appear less culpable or to suggest that his marriage had already been functionally over before his involvement with Lily began. As Claire and I continued to compare our evidence and our timelines, I began to realize that the affair between Lily and Victor had been far more extensive and sustained than Lily had admitted during our kitchen confrontation, and that her claims about the relationship being primarily emotional rather than physical seemed increasingly implausible given the frequency of their meetings and the intimate settings they had chosen for these encounters. Claire said that based on her review of Victor's calendar and his credit card statements, she believed he had been meeting Lily at least twice per week over the past 6 months, which was significantly more frequent than the pattern I had documented through Lily's calendar entries and our joint financial accounts. I asked Claire if it was possible that Victor and Lily had been meeting during times that did not appear in either of our documentation systems, perhaps during business hours, or in locations that would not generate obvious financial records, and Claire said that she suspected this was exactly what had been happening because there were gaps in Victor's work schedule and unexplained absences from his home office that did not correspond to any documented expenses or calendar entries, but that fit the pattern of someone who was conducting a secret relationship and was trying to minimize the paper trail that might expose their activities. Claire suggested that we should both continue to gather evidence independently for another week or two before deciding whether to confront Victor and Lily again, or whether to pursue some kind of public exposure that would hold them accountable in front of the professional and social communities where they had both been operating as though they were trustworthy and honest people. I told Claire that I was concerned about the risk of Victor and Lily coordinating their stories or destroying evidence if they knew that we were working together and comparing notes, and Claire agreed that we should be careful not to tip them off about our collaboration until we had gathered enough information to make their denials and justifications impossible to sustain. I mentioned to Claire that there was a major charity gala event scheduled to take place in approximately 2 weeks that Victor was chairing and that Lily had mentioned during our confrontation as being important for her nonprofit's funding prospects, and I suggested that this event might provide an appropriate setting for presenting our evidence to the board members and donors who had trusted Victor to manage the charity's resources and reputation responsibly. Claire's expression shifted from thoughtful to something that looked like grim satisfaction, and she said that using the gala as the venue for exposing the affair would be both symbolically appropriate and strategically effective because it would force Victor and Lily to face the consequences of their choices in front of the very people whose respect and support they had been most concerned about maintaining. We discussed the logistics of how such a presentation might work, and Claire suggested that we should prepare printed evidence packets that could be distributed to board members before the formal program began, so that when Victor stood up to deliver his chairman's remarks, the board would already have seen documentation of his affair and his lies, and would be in a position to demand accountability rather than accepting whatever explanation he might try to offer. I said that I thought this approach made sense, but that we would need to be careful about how we framed the evidence and what specific claims we made, because if we overstated our case or included information that could not be verified, then Victor and Lily would be able to focus on discrediting the evidence rather than addressing the substance of their betrayal. Claire agreed that we needed to be precise and factual in our presentation, and she offered to draft a summary document that would outline the timeline of the affair and the pattern of deception without making inflammatory accusations or speculating about aspects of their relationship that we could not prove through documentation. I said that I would continue to gather additional evidence over the next week and would also try to speak with anyone else who might have witnessed or suspected the affair, because having corroborating testimony from neutral third parties would make our case stronger and would make it harder for Victor and Lily to dismiss the evidence as the product of vindictive ex-spouses who were misinterpreting innocent professional interactions. As our meeting was concluding, I received a phone call from a number I recognized as belonging to Lily's sister Megan, and I excused myself from the table to take the call because Megan and I had always had a cordial relationship, and I was curious about whether she was calling to defend Lily or to offer some kind of mediation between us. When I answered the phone, Megan said that she had heard from their mother that Lily and I were going through a difficult time and that Lily had moved out of our house temporarily, and Megan said that she wanted me to know that she had suspected for several months that something was wrong with Lily's behavior and schedule, but that she had not felt it was her place to intervene in our marriage or to question Lily directly about what was happening. I asked Megan what specifically she had noticed about Lily's behavior that had seemed suspicious or concerning, and Megan said that over the past 6 months, Lily had called her late at night on at least 6 or 7 separate occasions from her car, and that during these calls, Lily had sounded distracted and guilty, and had been unwilling to explain where she was or why she was calling at such odd hours when she could have simply texted or called during normal daytime hours. Megan said that she had asked Lily during one of these calls whether everything was okay in her marriage and whether there was anything going on that she needed to talk about, and that Lily had become defensive and had said that Megan should not read too much into a few late-night phone calls and that everything was fine. I told Megan that I appreciated her willingness to share this information and that her observations about Lily's late-night calls and her evasive responses were consistent with the pattern of deception I had been documenting over the past several months, and I asked Megan if she would be willing to provide a written statement describing what she had noticed and when these suspicious phone calls had occurred. Megan hesitated and said that she was worried about damaging her relationship with Lily or being seen as taking sides in a marital conflict that she did not fully understand, but I pointed out that Lily had already damaged her own relationships through her choices and her lies, and that Megan's testimony would simply be confirming facts about behavior she had personally witnessed, rather than making judgments about Lily's character or motivations. Megan said that she would think about whether she was comfortable providing a written statement, and that she would call me back within the next day or two after she had time to consider what role she wanted to play in the situation and whether she felt morally obligated to document what she had observed, despite the potential consequences for her relationship with her sister. I told Megan that I understood her hesitation and that I would respect whatever decision she made, but that I wanted her to know that having family members willing to corroborate the timeline and pattern of suspicious behavior would be important if I decided to pursue any kind of formal separation or divorce proceedings that might require evidence of sustained deception rather than just a single incident of poor judgment. After ending the call with Megan, I returned to the table where Claire was waiting, and I told her about Megan's observations regarding the late-night phone calls and Lily's defensive responses when questioned about her activities. And Claire said that having a family member willing to testify about Lily's suspicious behavior would significantly strengthen our case because it would demonstrate that the affair had affected multiple relationships and had required Lily to lie not just to me, but also to her own family members who had expressed concern about changes in her behavior and availability. Claire suggested that if Megan did agree to provide a statement, we should include excerpts from it in the evidence packets we were preparing for the charity gala board members, because testimony from someone with no personal stake in the outcome beyond wanting to see truthful behavior would carry more weight than evidence provided solely by betrayed spouses, who might be perceived as having vindictive motivations. Over the next several days, I continued my normal work routine at the dispatch center while spending my off hours documenting additional evidence and reaching out to other people who might have information about Lily's relationship with Victor or who might have witnessed interactions between them that could corroborate the affair timeline. I received a call from Rachel who asked how I was doing and whether there had been any developments since she had left the voicemail that had triggered my initial confrontation with Lily, and I told Rachel about my conversation with Claire and about the discovery that Victor had been lying to Lily about his marital status and his plans to divorce, which meant that Lily had been both a perpetrator of betrayal in our marriage and a victim of manipulation by someone who had been using her for his own gratification without any genuine intention of leaving his wife. Rachel said that this information about Victor's lies made her feel somewhat more sympathetic toward Lily while also making her more angry at Victor for his calculated deception of multiple people, but that ultimately Lily was still responsible for her own choices, regardless of whether she had been misled about Victor's availability, because she had known she was married to me and had chosen to pursue an intimate relationship with another man, rather than addressing whatever dissatisfaction or disconnection she was feeling in our marriage through honest conversation or couples counseling. I agreed with Rachel's assessment and said that while I now understood that Lily had been manipulated by Victor in some ways, that manipulation did not excuse the months of systematic lying she had engaged in, or the fact that she had constructed elaborate alibis involving fake therapy appointments and vague work obligations specifically designed to hide her activities from me. Rachel asked if I would want her to attend the charity gala when Claire and I presented our evidence to the board, and she offered to serve as a witness who could testify about what she had seen at the hotel bar and about the voicemail she had left for me when her guilt about covering for Lily had finally become unbearable. I told Rachel that I appreciated her offer and that having her present as a witness would be valuable, but that I wanted to make sure she understood that attending the gala and providing public testimony would likely end her friendship with Lily permanently, because Lily would see Rachel's participation as a betrayal rather than as an act of conscience or loyalty to truth. Rachel said that she had already accepted that her friendship with Lily was effectively over, because she could no longer trust Lily's honesty or respect the choices Lily had been making, and that she felt attending the gala and speaking truthfully about what she had witnessed would be a way of maintaining her own integrity and demonstrating to herself that she valued honesty over social convenience. I told Rachel that if she was certain about this decision, then I would coordinate with Claire to make sure Rachel was included in the planning for the gala presentation, and that we would prepare a role for her that would allow her to contribute her testimony without requiring her to engage in any kind of hostile confrontation or dramatic performance. 2 days after my meeting with Claire, I received a text message from Megan saying that she had decided she would provide a written statement about the late-night phone calls she had received from Lily, and about her suspicions that something inappropriate was happening in Lily's life, and Megan said that she had come to this decision because she believed that protecting family members from consequences of their own poor choices was ultimately more harmful than holding them accountable and creating pressure for them to change their behavior and rebuild trust through demonstrated honesty. Megan and I arranged to meet at a restaurant near her house, and she brought with her a 2-page typed statement that described in careful detail the dates and times she could remember receiving late-night calls from Lily, the evasive and defensive tone of Lily's responses when asked where she was or what was wrong, and Megan's growing sense over a period of several months that her sister was involved in something she was ashamed of, but was not willing to discuss openly. I read through Megan's statement and was impressed by how precisely she had documented her observations without making accusations or jumping to conclusions about what Lily's behavior meant, and I thanked her for taking the time to write out her recollections in such a thoughtful and detailed way. Megan said that writing the statement had actually been helpful for her own processing of the situation because it had forced her to think carefully about what she had actually witnessed versus what she had assumed or speculated about, and that she felt more confident in her decision to come forward now that she had reviewed her own evidence and recognized that her concerns had been based on real patterns of behavior rather than on paranoia or family gossip. I asked Megan if she had told Lily or their mother that she was providing this statement to me, and Megan said that she had not, because she felt that giving Lily advance warning would simply create an opportunity for Lily to try to pressure her into withdrawing the statement, or to construct explanations that would make Megan doubt her own perceptions and observations. Megan said that she planned to tell their mother after the charity gala had taken place and after the evidence had been presented publicly, because at that point there would be no way to undo what had been revealed and no possibility of family pressure being used to protect Lily from the consequences of choices she had made over an extended period of time. Later that week, I met again with Claire at the same coffee shop where we had initially compared evidence, and this time we were joined by Rachel, who brought with her the signed statement she had written about seeing Lily and Victor together at the hotel bar, and about leaving the voicemail that had triggered my confrontation with Lily. The three of us spent 2 hours reviewing all the evidence we had collectively gathered and organizing it into categories that included financial documentation, witness testimony, timeline analysis, and proof of Victor's lies about his marital status, and Claire took the lead in drafting a 1-page summary document that would serve as the cover sheet for the evidence packets we planned to distribute to board members at the charity gala. The summary document that Claire drafted was written in neutral, factual language that avoided inflammatory rhetoric or personal attacks, and it simply stated that the board chair, Victor Morrison, had been conducting an undisclosed romantic relationship with Lily Pierce, who was the founder of a nonprofit organization currently being considered for funding by the charity board, and that this relationship had been hidden from board members and from both Victor's wife and Lily's husband through systematic deception involving false alibis and fabricated explanations for meetings that had taken place at hotels and restaurants over a period of at least 6 months. The summary document noted that this undisclosed relationship created a clear conflict of interest that violated the charity board's ethics policies regarding impartiality in funding decisions, and it stated that the attached evidence included financial records, witness statements, and documentation of false statements made by Victor regarding his marital status. I suggested that we should also include in the evidence packet a copy of the charity board's own written ethics policy regarding conflicts of interest and mandatory disclosure requirements, because having the board's own policy language included in the packet would make it impossible for anyone to claim that Victor's behavior was simply a private matter that had no bearing on his professional responsibilities. Claire agreed with this suggestion and obtained a copy of the ethics policy from the charity's website, and she highlighted the specific sections that required board members to disclose any personal or financial relationships that might create actual or perceived conflicts of interest in their decision-making authority. As we finalized the evidence packets, Claire raised the question of how we should handle the actual presentation at the gala, and specifically whether we should attempt to speak directly to the board and the assembled guests, or whether we should simply distribute the packets and allow the evidence to speak for itself without any dramatic confrontation or public accusation. I said that I thought we should plan to have a facilitator who was not emotionally involved in the situation present the evidence to the board, because having a neutral third party manage the presentation would make it less likely that Victor or Lily could dismiss the evidence as the product of vindictive ex-spouses who were distorting facts to serve their own emotional needs. Rachel suggested that we should approach Harold Chen, who served as the vice chair of the charity board and who had a reputation as a fair-minded retired judge who took ethics issues very seriously. And she said that if we could convince Harold to review the evidence in advance and to agree to facilitate the board's discussion of the matter at the gala, then the presentation would have institutional legitimacy rather than appearing to be a personal attack orchestrated by aggrieved family members. Claire said that she knew Harold professionally through her work at the hospital and that she believed he would be receptive to reviewing the evidence and to taking appropriate action if he concluded that the documentation supported the allegations of conflict of interest and deception. Claire volunteered to contact Harold and to request a private meeting where she could present the evidence and could ask him to facilitate the board's review of the matter at the gala, and she said that she would frame the request not as asking him to make a judgment about Victor's personal behavior, but rather as asking him to ensure that the board fulfilled its fiduciary duty to review potential conflicts of interest and to maintain the integrity of its funding decision processes. I told Claire that I thought this was the right approach and that having Harold's participation would significantly increase the likelihood that the evidence would be taken seriously and would result in meaningful consequences for Victor's position on the board. The following day, Claire called me to report that she had met with Harold and had shown him the evidence packets, and that Harold had been visibly shocked by the extent of the documentation and by the timeline of deception that the evidence revealed. Claire said that Harold had asked her detailed questions about how she had obtained the financial records and the witness statements, and whether she was confident that all the information in the packets was accurate and verifiable, and that after reviewing the materials for nearly an hour, Harold had said that he believed the evidence was sufficiently credible and concerning that it warranted immediate board review regardless of the personal embarrassment or disruption it might cause to the charity's planned gala event. Harold had told Claire that he would not make any final decisions about how to handle the situation until he had an opportunity to speak with Victor directly and to give him a chance to respond to the allegations, but that based on his preliminary review of the evidence, he believed there was a clear conflict of interest that should have been disclosed to the board months ago, when Victor first became involved in evaluating Lily's nonprofit for potential funding. Claire said that Harold had agreed to facilitate a special session at the gala where the evidence would be presented to the full board and where Victor would be given an opportunity to respond, and that Harold would ensure that the session was conducted in accordance with the board's procedural rules so that any decisions made would have legitimate institutional authority, rather than appearing to be the result of personal vendettas or emotional reactions. I asked Claire whether Harold had indicated what the likely outcome would be if the board concluded that Victor had violated ethics policies by failing to disclose his relationship with Lily, and Claire said that Harold had explained that the board's bylaws provided for immediate removal of any board member who was found to have acted with undisclosed conflicts of interest in matters involving funding decisions or resource allocation, and that if Victor was removed from the board, any funding recommendations he had made or supported would automatically be subject to independent review by the remaining board members to ensure that those recommendations had been based on legitimate merit rather than on personal favoritism or inappropriate relationships. This information about the potential consequences for both Victor's board position and Lily's funding prospects made me realize that the gala presentation would effectively end whatever professional relationship had existed between them and would force both of them to face public accountability in front of the very community whose respect and approval they had been most concerned about maintaining throughout their 6 months of secret meetings and carefully constructed alibis. I felt no satisfaction or pleasure in contemplating the humiliation they would experience when the evidence was presented, but I did feel a sense of grim determination that the truth needed to be established in a public forum with witnesses who could not be manipulated or gaslit into doubting what the documentation clearly showed. During the week leading up to the charity gala, I had minimal contact with Lily beyond a few brief text message exchanges about practical matters related to our living situation and our shared financial accounts. And I used this period of separation to prepare myself emotionally for the confrontation that would occur at the gala and to think carefully about what I hoped to achieve through the public exposure of her affair with Victor. I recognized that part of my motivation was simply a desire for justice and accountability, and a need to ensure that Lily and Victor could not rewrite the narrative of what had happened in ways that minimized their deception or portrayed me as an unreasonable or controlling spouse who had driven Lily into the arms of someone who appreciated her in ways I supposedly had not. But I also recognized that another part of my motivation was more complex and had to do with my own need to demonstrate to myself that I was capable of responding to betrayal with systematic precision rather than with emotional chaos, and that my training as a 911 dispatcher and my temperament as someone who valued documentation and evidence over dramatic confrontation had prepared me to handle this personal crisis in ways that maintained my integrity and my sense of control even as my marriage collapsed around me. I spent time during this week journaling about my feelings and my reactions to the situation, and I was somewhat surprised to discover that alongside the anger and hurt I expected to feel, there was also a strange sense of clarity and purpose that came from knowing exactly what had happened and from having irrefutable evidence that made it impossible for anyone to claim I was overreacting or misinterpreting innocent professional interactions. 3 days before the gala, I received a phone call from an attorney named Richard Carlson, who introduced himself as someone who specialized in divorce and family law and who had been recommended to me by a colleague at the dispatch center who had gone through a difficult separation several years earlier. Richard said that he had been briefed on the general outline of my situation and that he wanted to schedule a consultation to discuss my legal options and to begin preparing separation paperwork that could be filed immediately after the charity gala if I decided that divorce was the appropriate course of action given the evidence I had documented. I met with Richard at his office the next day and spent 2 hours reviewing the evidence I had gathered, including the voicemail from Rachel, the rideshare receipts and financial statements showing hotel charges, the documentation of Lily's fake therapy appointments, the witness statements from Rachel and Megan, and the text messages that Claire had obtained showing Victor's lies to Lily about his marital status and his plans for divorce. Richard reviewed all of this material with the careful attention of someone who was accustomed to evaluating evidence for its legal admissibility and its persuasive value in court proceedings, and when he finished his review, he said that I had assembled one of the most thoroughly documented cases of marital infidelity and systematic deception that he had seen in his 15 years of practicing family law. Richard explained that in our state, adultery was still recognized as grounds for divorce and could affect the division of marital assets and the determination of spousal support obligations, and that the strength of the evidence I had gathered would make it very difficult for Lily to contest the divorce or to argue for an equal division of assets, given that she had violated her marital obligations and had used joint financial resources to facilitate her affair through rideshare charges and through time that should have been devoted to our marriage, but was instead spent pursuing an inappropriate relationship with Victor. Richard said that he would draft a separation petition that documented the timeline of Lily's affair and that requested an unequal division of assets in my favor based on her breach of marital duties and her use of joint resources to support her relationship with Victor. I asked Richard whether proceeding with the public evidence presentation at the charity gala would create any legal complications or would give Lily grounds to claim that I was harassing her or engaging in some kind of vindictive campaign that went beyond legitimate efforts to hold her accountable for her choices. Richard said that, as long as the evidence I presented was factually accurate and was presented in a context where it had legitimate relevance to institutional decision-making, such as a charity board's evaluation of conflict of interest issues, then I would be protected by the principle that truthful disclosure of facts in appropriate forms did not constitute harassment or defamation, regardless of how embarrassing or damaging those facts might be to the people involved. Richard also pointed out that by having Harold facilitate the presentation as part of the board's official review process, rather than staging my own dramatic confrontation, I was further protecting myself from any claims that I was acting inappropriately or vindictively, because I would simply be providing factual evidence to a board that had legitimate authority to investigate ethics violations and to make decisions about board membership and funding recommendations. Richard said that he thought the strategy Claire and I had developed was legally sound and was actually more restrained than many responses he had seen from clients in similar situations, and that the focus on institutional accountability rather than on personal revenge would serve me well if Lily attempted to portray my actions as excessive or abusive in any subsequent divorce proceedings. With Richard's legal guidance and Claire's coordination with Harold, we finalized the plans for the charity gala presentation and confirmed that Harold would convene a special board session approximately 1 hour after the gala's scheduled start time, which would give guests and donors time to arrive and socialize but would address the ethics issue before the formal dinner program and fundraising appeals began. Harold had explained to Claire that he felt it was important to handle the matter early in the evening, rather than waiting until after dinner, because if the board decided to remove Victor from his position as chair, then it would be inappropriate for Victor to deliver the chairman's remarks or to participate in the fundraising presentations that would occur later in the program. Claire and I agreed to arrive at the gala venue 45 minutes before the scheduled start time so that we could distribute the evidence packets to board members as they arrived and could ensure that each board member had adequate time to review the materials before Harold convened the special session. We prepared 20 evidence packets in clear sleeves with the one-page summary document on top, followed by the financial records, witness statements, timeline documentation, Victor's marriage certificate, and the relevant sections of the board's ethics policy. And we placed each packet in a manila envelope labeled with the board member's name so that the distribution would be organized and professional rather than chaotic or confrontational. On the evening of the charity gala, I dressed in the dark suit I normally wore to formal work events and drove to the venue, which was a historic hotel ballroom downtown that the charity had rented for its annual fundraising event. When I arrived, I found Claire already waiting in the lobby with a large box containing the evidence packets, and she looked composed and determined, despite what I imagined must be significant anxiety about the confrontation that was about to unfold with her husband of 22 years. Claire told me that Rachel and Megan had both confirmed they would be attending the gala and would be available to provide testimony if the board requested additional clarification or corroboration of the written statements included in the evidence packets. We proceeded to the ballroom where event staff were still setting up tables and arranging place settings for the dinner that would follow the board session, and we identified a large table near the front of the room that had been designated for board members and that had name cards at each seat indicating where each board member would be sitting. Claire and I placed one evidence packet at each board member's seat, positioning the manila envelopes so that they would be immediately visible when board members approached the table but would not be so prominently displayed that curious guests or event staff would pick them up and start reading through materials that were intended for board review only. As we were finishing the packet distribution, Harold arrived and approached us with a serious expression that made it clear he understood the gravity of what was about to occur and was prepared to manage the board session with appropriate formality and procedural rigor. Harold asked Claire and me to wait in a small side room adjacent to the ballroom until the board session was ready to begin, and he explained that he wanted to give board members time to arrive and to begin reviewing the evidence packets before he called the formal session to order, so that when the discussion began, board members would already have some familiarity with the allegations and the documentation rather than being presented with the information cold. Over the next 30 minutes, we waited in the side room while sounds of arriving guests and conversations filtered through the walls, and periodically event staff would open the door to retrieve supplies or equipment, and we would catch glimpses of the ballroom filling with people in formal attire who were socializing and accepting welcome drinks from servers circulating through the crowd. At one point, I saw through the partially open door that Lily had arrived and was standing near the entrance talking with several people I recognized as other nonprofit leaders from the local environmental community, and I noticed that she appeared calm and professionally dressed and gave no indication that she suspected anything unusual was about to occur during what she presumably expected to be a routine fundraising gala. About 10 minutes later, I saw Victor enter the ballroom wearing a tuxedo and moving through the crowd with the confident bearing of someone who was accustomed to being the center of attention at these kinds of events, and I watched as he approached the board table and picked up the manila envelope that had been placed at his seat. Victor opened the envelope and pulled out the evidence packet, and even from my distant vantage point I could see his expression change dramatically as he read the summary document and began to understand what he was looking at and what was about to happen. Victor looked around the ballroom with what appeared to be a combination of panic and anger, and he approached several other board members who had also begun reading their evidence packets and who were looking at him with expressions that ranged from confusion to disapproval. I saw Victor speaking intensely to one board member and gesturing at the evidence packet as though trying to explain or justify what the documents contained, but the board member simply shook his head and walked away from Victor with the evidence packet still in his hand. Harold emerged from the ballroom and entered the side room where Claire and I were waiting, and he said that approximately half of the board members had arrived and had received their evidence packets, and that the reactions ranged from shocked disbelief to grim confirmation of suspicions that some board members had apparently harbored for months about Victor's relationship with Lily. Harold said that Victor had approached him and had demanded to know who was responsible for distributing the evidence packets, and had insisted that the materials contained false allegations that had been compiled by his estranged wife as part of a vindictive campaign related to their marital problems. Harold said that he had told Victor the evidence would be reviewed by the full board in accordance with established procedures and that Victor would have an opportunity to respond to the allegations during the special session, but that in the meantime Victor needed to conduct himself professionally and needed to refrain from attempting to intimidate board members or to suppress the review process through threats or procedural objections. Harold returned to the ballroom to continue monitoring the situation and to ensure that all board members received their evidence packets and had adequate time to review the materials before the formal session began. And Claire and I remained in the side room discussing what we expected would happen once the board convened and began asking questions about the documented timeline of Victor's relationship with Lily and his failure to disclose the obvious conflict of interest that his romantic involvement created. Claire said that she had been thinking about what she would say if the board asked her to provide testimony or to clarify any aspects of the evidence she had contributed, and she had decided that she would focus on the factual timeline of Victor's deception and his lies about planning to divorce her, rather than on her personal feelings of betrayal or humiliation, because she believed that keeping the focus on documented facts rather than on emotional reactions would make it harder for Victor to dismiss the evidence as the product of a bitter spouse seeking revenge. I told Claire that I agreed with this approach and that I planned to adopt a similar strategy if I was called upon to provide testimony, and I said that my training as a 911 dispatcher had taught me that the most effective way to establish credibility in high-stakes situations was to remain calm and factual and to let documented evidence speak for itself, rather than trying to persuade people through emotional appeals or dramatic presentations. Claire nodded and said that she appreciated having a partner in this process who understood the value of systematic documentation and procedural rigor, and that she felt more confident about facing the board session, knowing that the evidence we had assembled was thorough enough to withstand any attempts by Victor to create doubt or confusion about what had actually occurred. About 20 minutes after Harold had left us in the side room, he returned and said that all 12 board members had now arrived and had received their evidence packets, and that he was prepared to convene the special session and to begin the formal review of the ethics allegations against Victor. Harold said that he had spoken briefly with several board members who had expressed shock and disappointment about the documented pattern of deception, and that at least 2 board members had told him privately that they had noticed unusual interactions between Victor and Lily at previous charity events, but had not felt they had sufficient evidence to raise concerns formally until now, when the comprehensive timeline and witness statements made it clear that their observations had been part of a larger pattern of inappropriate relationship conduct. Harold asked Claire and me to enter the ballroom and to take seats in a designated area near the board table where we would be visible to board members and available to answer questions if needed, but where we would not be positioned in a way that suggested we were making accusations or demanding specific outcomes from the board's deliberations. Harold explained that he wanted the session to feel like a professional institutional review rather than like a confrontational intervention orchestrated by aggrieved family members, and that maintaining appropriate formality and procedural distance would help ensure that any decisions the board made would be based on the documented evidence and the organization's ethics policies rather than on emotional reactions to the personal drama underlying the situation. As Claire and I entered the ballroom, I noticed that the crowd of gala guests had grown substantially, and that there were now approximately 80 people in attendance, including donors, nonprofit leaders, and community supporters who had come expecting a routine fundraising event, and who appeared confused by the unusual tension and serious atmosphere that had developed around the board table. I saw Lily standing with a small group near the bar area, and when she noticed me entering with Claire, her expression shifted from casual socializing to something that looked like dawning realization and fear, and I watched as she excused herself from her conversation and began moving quickly toward the board table, as though to intercede before whatever was about to happen could proceed. Harold stepped to a microphone that had been set up near the board table and asked for everyone's attention, and he announced that before the evening's formal program began, the board needed to convene a brief special session to address an urgent ethics matter that had come to the board's attention earlier that evening. Harold's announcement caused a ripple of surprised conversation through the assembled guests, and I saw several people pulling out their phones as though to document what was happening or to alert others who were not present that something unusual was occurring at what was supposed to be a celebratory fundraising event. Harold asked the 12 board members to please take their seats at the designated board table, and he requested that all other guests remain in the ballroom but maintain a respectful distance from the board table so that the board could conduct its deliberations with appropriate privacy and focus. Victor initially remained standing near the microphone as though he intended to address the crowd himself, but Harold firmly directed him to take his seat with the other board members and told him that he would have an opportunity to respond to the allegations after the board had reviewed the evidence and had asked any clarifying questions. Once all board members were seated, Harold began by explaining that the board had received documentation earlier that evening indicating that the board chair Victor Morrison had been conducting an undisclosed romantic relationship with Lily Pierce, who was the founder of a nonprofit organization that was currently under consideration for substantial funding from the charity board, and that this undisclosed relationship appeared to constitute a clear conflict of interest that violated the organization's ethics policies regarding impartiality in funding decisions and mandatory disclosure of personal relationships that might create actual or perceived bias in board deliberations. Harold said that each board member had received an evidence packet containing financial records, witness statements, timeline documentation, and other materials that supported these allegations, and that the board's responsibility during this special session was to review the evidence, to provide Victor with an opportunity to respond to the allegations, and to determine whether the documented conduct warranted disciplinary action up to and including removal from the board in accordance with the organization's bylaws and governance procedures. As Harold was explaining the purpose of the special session, Lily approached the board table and asked to be recognized so that she could address the allegations that involved her organization and her reputation. But Harold told her that the session was limited to board members and invited witnesses, and that she would need to remain in the general guest area unless and until the board requested her testimony. Lily protested that she had a right to defend herself against accusations that could destroy her nonprofit's funding prospects and her professional reputation. But Harold remained firm and said that the board's review was focused on Victor's conduct and his compliance with ethics policies, rather than on making judgments about Lily's character or motivations, and that any impact on her funding application would be a secondary consequence of the board's need to ensure that its decision-making processes were free from undisclosed conflicts of interest. Harold then asked me to approach the microphone and to provide a brief summary of how I had discovered Victor's relationship with Lily and what evidence I had gathered to document the timeline and nature of their interactions over the past 6 months. I stood and walked to the microphone with the same deliberate calm I used when managing high-pressure situations at my dispatch center, and I began by stating my name and my relationship to Lily and explaining that I was a 911 dispatcher trained in systematic documentation and evidence gathering, which had informed my approach to investigating the suspicious patterns in Lily's schedule and activities that I had first noticed approximately 3 months earlier. I described receiving the voicemail from Rachel, in which she had reported seeing Lily with Victor at a hotel bar on an evening when Lily had claimed to be attending a therapy appointment, and I explained that this voicemail had prompted me to review our shared calendar and our joint financial accounts to look for patterns that might either confirm or refute the affair allegations. I outlined the 11 project deadline calendar entries that I had documented over a 6-month period, the 9 rideshare charges to hotel district locations that corresponded to many of these calendar entries, and the discovery that Lily's claims about attending weekly therapy sessions for 2 months had been completely fabricated, as confirmed by the therapy clinic's statement that they had no patient record for her under her name. As I was providing this summary, I maintained eye contact with the board members and spoke in a level tone that conveyed factual information without emotional embellishment, and I noticed that several board members were following along in their evidence packets and marking specific pages as I referenced different types of documentation. When I finished my summary, Harold thanked me and asked if any board members had questions about the evidence I had presented, and one board member raised her hand and asked whether I had any direct evidence of physical intimacy between Lily and Victor beyond the witness observation of a kiss, or whether the documented meetings could potentially be explained as intensive professional mentoring that had simply been poorly disclosed and inappropriately scheduled. I responded that I had no photographic or video evidence of physical intimacy beyond what had been witnessed and reported by Rachel, but that the pattern of twice-weekly meetings over 6 months at hotel bars and restaurants, combined with Lily's systematic lying about her whereabouts, including fabricating therapy appointments, suggested a level of secrecy and deception that went far beyond what would be necessary or appropriate for a legitimate professional mentoring relationship. I also pointed out that the text messages obtained by Claire showed Victor lying to Lily about his marital status and his plans to divorce, which indicated that both parties understood their relationship to be romantic rather than professional and were managing it with the kind of secrecy typically reserved for affairs rather than for mentor relationships. Harold then called on Claire to approach the microphone and to provide her perspective as Victor's wife and as someone who had independently discovered evidence of the affair through her own investigation of unexplained charges and schedule changes. Claire stood and walked to the microphone with composed dignity, and she began by stating that she had been married to Victor for 22 years and had trusted him completely until she had begun noticing hotel and restaurant charges on their joint credit card statements that corresponded to evenings when Victor had claimed to be attending board meetings or business dinners with other charity administrators. Claire described confronting Victor about these charges and about the text messages she had found on his phone that referenced meetings with Lily, and she explained that Victor had initially denied any improper relationship, but had eventually admitted to emotional intimacy with someone he described as a young professional he was mentoring through the nonprofit funding process. Claire said that what had been most disturbing to her was not just the affair itself, but Victor's deliberate lies to Lily about his marital status and his supposed plans to divorce, which she said demonstrated a pattern of manipulation that extended beyond his betrayal of their marriage and suggested a willingness to deceive anyone whose trust and affection served his personal gratification. Claire then held up a copy of her marriage certificate and stated for the record that she and Victor remained legally married and that there had never been any divorce filing or separation agreement, which meant that Victor's claims to Lily about ending his marriage had been complete fabrications designed to make Lily feel less guilty about participating in an affair with a married man. Claire concluded by saying that she was not asking the board to punish Victor for betraying her personally, but that she believed the board had an obligation to consider whether someone who had systematically deceived both his wife and his affair partner while using his position as board chair to cultivate an inappropriate relationship with a funding applicant could be trusted to exercise impartial judgment in the organization's governance and resource allocation decisions. After Claire finished her testimony, Harold asked Victor if he wished to respond to the allegations and the documented evidence, and Victor stood and approached the microphone with an expression that combined defiance and barely controlled anger. Victor began by saying that he acknowledged having developed a close personal relationship with Lily over the past 6 months, but that he characterized this relationship as a mentoring friendship that had occasionally crossed emotional boundaries in ways he now recognized were inappropriate, and he insisted that the relationship had never become physically intimate in ways that would constitute a sexual affair. Victor said that the hotel bar meetings documented in the evidence packets had been his preferred venues for informal professional conversations, because he found that nonprofit leaders were more relaxed and candid in casual settings than in formal office environments, and he claimed that he had met with numerous funding applicants in similar settings over his years of service on the charity board without anyone questioning the appropriateness of his approach to relationship building and donor cultivation. Victor continued by saying that his failure to disclose his personal relationship with Lily to the board had been an oversight rather than a deliberate attempt to hide a conflict of interest, and he argued that because he had not been the sole decision-maker on funding recommendations and because Lily's nonprofit application would ultimately be reviewed by the full board, his personal connection to her did not constitute the kind of conflict that required formal disclosure under the organization's ethics policies. Victor also claimed that the text messages in which he had discussed his marriage with Lily had been taken out of context and misinterpreted, and that he had never explicitly told Lily that he was divorced, but had simply discussed marital difficulties in ways that Lily might have misunderstood as indicating that his marriage was ending. As Victor was speaking, I watched the faces of the board members and saw expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly dismissive, and it was clear that his attempt to reframe 6 months of secret meetings and systematic deception as an innocent mentoring relationship that had been misunderstood was not landing with an audience that had just reviewed comprehensive documentation showing a clear pattern of behavior that went far beyond professional networking. When Victor finished his statement and returned to his seat, Harold asked if any board members had questions for Victor or wanted him to address specific aspects of the documented evidence, and immediately 3 board members raised their hands to indicate they wanted to speak. The first board member to be recognized was a woman in her 60s named Patricia, who had served on the charity board for over a decade and who had a reputation for asking direct questions and not accepting vague or evasive answers. Patricia asked Victor to explain why he had met with Lily twice per week for 6 months, without ever mentioning these meetings to other board members or including them in the meeting logs that board chairs were expected to maintain as part of the organization's transparency and accountability procedures, and she pointed out that the frequency and duration of these meetings went far beyond what would be typical or necessary for providing guidance to a funding applicant, especially given that dozens of other nonprofit leaders managed to navigate the application process successfully without requiring anything approaching this level of personal attention from the board chair. Victor responded that he had found Lily's environmental mission particularly compelling and had wanted to provide extra support to help her organization succeed, and that he had not documented the meetings in official board logs because he had viewed them as informal conversations rather than as official board business. Patricia immediately challenged this explanation by pointing out that discussions about funding applications were by definition official board business, regardless of where they occurred or how informal the setting might be, and that Victor's claim that dozens of hours of meetings with a funding applicant over a 6-month period did not constitute board business was either disingenuous or reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of his fiduciary responsibilities as board chair. The second board member to speak was a man named Thomas who worked as a compliance officer at a large financial institution and who approached organizational ethics issues with the systematic rigor of someone trained to identify and eliminate conflicts of interest in professional decision-making contexts. Thomas asked Victor to address the specific text messages that had been included in the evidence packet, and in particular the message where Victor had written to Lily expressing sympathy for her marital difficulties and suggesting that they both deserved to find happiness with people who truly appreciated them, which Thomas said appeared to be a clear indication that Victor viewed his relationship with Lily as romantic rather than professional and was actively encouraging her to see him as a potential romantic partner rather than simply as a professional mentor. Victor hesitated before responding to this question, and when he finally spoke, he said that he acknowledged the text message had used language that was more personal than was appropriate for a professional mentoring relationship, but that he had been responding to Lily's expressions of unhappiness in her marriage and had simply been trying to provide emotional support during what he understood to be a difficult time in her personal life. Thomas pointed out that providing emotional support to someone about their marital difficulties while simultaneously concealing one's own marital status and meeting that person secretly at hotel bars twice per week was not the behavior of a professional mentor, but was rather the behavior of someone actively pursuing a romantic relationship. And he asked Victor directly whether he had at any point told Lily that he was separated from his wife or planning to divorce, which would constitute deliberate deception about his availability for a romantic relationship. Victor's face flushed as Thomas asked this question, and after a long pause he admitted that he had told Lily that his marriage was troubled and that he was considering separation. But he insisted that this had been true at the time he said it, and that he had not intended to mislead Lily about his marital status, but had simply been sharing his genuine feelings and uncertainties about his relationship with Claire. Claire, who was still standing near the board table, immediately spoke up and said that Victor had never mentioned any intention to separate or divorce during the entire 6-month period when he had been meeting with Lily, and that in fact during this same period he and Claire had been making long-term financial plans that assumed they would remain married, including refinancing their home mortgage and discussing retirement account allocations that only made sense in the context of an ongoing marriage. Harold asked Claire if she had any documentation to support this claim that Victor had been making long-term marital plans during the same period when he was telling Lily his marriage was ending, and Claire produced printed copies of email exchanges with their mortgage broker and their financial advisor that showed Victor actively participating in planning discussions as recently as 3 weeks earlier. These emails were passed around the board table, and I watched as board members reviewed them and then looked at Victor with expressions that suggested his credibility was rapidly eroding as each new piece of evidence contradicted his attempts to minimize or reframe his conduct. The third board member to ask a question was a younger woman named Jennifer, who had recently joined the board after building a successful career in nonprofit management, and who had been particularly vocal about the importance of maintaining clear ethical boundaries in relationships between funders and funding applicants. Jennifer asked Victor to explain how he expected the board to have confidence in his recommendation of Lily's organization for funding, given that he had been conducting an undisclosed romantic relationship with her throughout the entire evaluation period, and she pointed out that even if the board were to accept his characterization of the relationship as emotionally intimate, but not physically consummated, the documented pattern of secret meetings and mutual emotional support would still create an obvious bias that should have disqualified him from participating in any decisions related to her funding application. Victor responded that he believed his professional judgment had remained sound despite his personal feelings for Lily, and that his recommendation of her organization had been based entirely on the quality of her mission and her program outcomes rather than on any desire to curry favor or to advance their personal relationship. Jennifer immediately challenged this claim by asking how Victor expected anyone to believe that 6 months of twice-weekly secret meetings at romantic settings like hotel bars had not influenced his assessment of Lily's organization, and she pointed out that the entire purpose of conflict of interest policies was to prevent situations where personal relationships might create even the appearance of bias in funding decisions, regardless of whether the person involved believed they could maintain objectivity. Harold then addressed the full board and said that based on the testimony and evidence that had been presented, he believed the board needed to make two separate decisions regarding Victor's continued service and regarding Lily's funding application. Harold asked if any board member wished to make a motion regarding Victor's status on the board, and Patricia immediately moved that Victor be removed from the board effective immediately due to his violation of ethics policies regarding disclosure of conflicts of interest and his failure to maintain appropriate professional boundaries in his interactions with funding applicants. The motion was seconded by Thomas, and Harold called for a vote without further discussion, and I watched as 11 of the 12 board members raised their hands in support of the removal motion, with only one abstention from a longtime friend of Victor's who appeared uncomfortable with the proceedings, but who did not vote against removal. Harold announced that the motion had passed by a vote of 11-0 with one abstention, and that effective immediately Victor Morrison was no longer a member of the charity board and was asked to vacate his seat at the board table. Victor stood and gathered his belongings and walked toward the ballroom exit without looking at anyone, and as he left, I saw Lily standing near the bar area with tears running down her face as she processed what had just occurred.